for all your attention and your participation with our first topic. But now we are going to continue to the next topic that we are going to discuss about the shaping the future of tech startups in Thailand insights on investment. Today we have an honor to hear from three speakers, and then after that we will have the panel discussion among three of them are going to discuss more on this topic in the insights on investment. So right now this topic are going to conduct in English. So anyone would like to receive the interpretation headset, you can just contact our staff right on the next to the stage. ลำดับถัดไปนะคะในหัวข้อของ Shaping the Future of
So the next topic on shaping the future of tech startups in Thailand, insights on investment. You can receive interpretation headsets beside the stage. You can use your ID card and contact the staff beside the main stage.
Start with the first speaker of this session. Here going to talk about Thailand's journey to become a global fintech hub. We have an honor to welcome the CEO and founder of the Weir Group, which is one of the world's largest independent financial advisory, asset management, and also fintech organizations. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, could you please give a big round of applause and welcome Mr. Nigel Green.
Thank you. Wow, that picture was taken ages ago. Wow, I look older now, huh? Oh, it's great to be in Thailand, and thank you very, very much for the National Innovation Agency for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be in Thailand and meet with so many people that are innovative. I'm going to talk about the financial future, and I'm going to talk about what Thailand can achieve. We'll talk about challenges. We'll talk about what the future holds and how there's an incredible opportunity, in my opinion, right now. Let's start by talking about fintech. What is it? What is fintech? What does it really mean? Well, just think when we're in society and everything that we do, here there's incredible food stands, there's incredible robots. Did you see the robots? Wow. Okay, there's amazing things that are happening just everywhere. But guess what? We all need money. Anybody in the room doesn't need money? You see, I'm right. Everybody needs money. So how do we make sure that we have a hub in Thailand, which is possible, a global hub, which really enhances not just the Thai economy, but actually achieves something globally, changes things, does something that Thailand can be extremely proud of. Okay, how? Well, something that you've already embraced, and perhaps you don't realize how good you are, but Thailand already has good payment services. It's already developed fintech to some level. In fact, there's lots of you I can see in the room that have got a phone, and I can see you're taking notes and you're actually paying attention, but at the same time, you're using your phone. I can see it. Okay, what does it tell us? It tells us already Thailand has embraced it. Let's talk about what fintech can really do. We think about currencies just as a start. We're in a world where they charge you. So if you have Thai baht, you change it to dollars, and they charge you. And you send it somewhere else, and they charge you. So just imagine a world where, and it's coming, you know it's coming, I know it's coming, where you have digital currencies. It has to come. Why? Governments will save 30% of their costs, 30%, by just having the digitalization of currencies. So you can think what you like, but guess what? The digitalization of currencies is not something that is speculative, and it's this. If you know something's going to happen, do you think that presents an opportunity? I believe in Thailand, you know, there's some gambling goes on every now and again. Is that correct? And every now and again, maybe people gamble on football. Is that right? maybe even English football. And I can see some people at the back there smiling. They're guilty for sure. You'll notice a blue tie. I apologise because I know there's lots of Manchester United fans and Liverpool fans, and I'm a Chelsea fan, so don't throw me off the stage yet. But I'll get to the point. Just think, we live in a world where we can watch those TVs. We live in a world where banks charge a fortune if we're not careful. And Thailand, perhaps, with its millions of people that work around the world and send their money back to Thailand. There's $8 billion. Think about that. And let's say, because I don't want to criticize any one particular company, but let's say they take 10% because there's a cut here, there's cut here, there's cut here, and they pay, okay, just what? Just think about digitalization of currencies and how that can make a difference. And if you've got digitalization of currencies, it doesn't stop there. So that's a guarantee. If I could give you a football game and you knew who was going to be the winner, you could bet on it, right? Okay, well, the same thing in financial services. If you know what's going to happen, it gives you an advantage, because if you know the result, then guess what? You can actually enhance your career, enhance what you're doing, just simply and solely because you know where it's going. Digitalization of currencies is inevitable. And follows with that, the digitalization, of course, all asset classes. You'll see the digitalization of shares. It's ridiculous that people use paper in today's world. You know it, I do. Germy, horrible pieces of paper. I mean, how crazy? It's changing, and it's going to change fast. And Thailand is in a great place to take advantage of it right now. You'll see the asset classes change. You'll see that people can access things. They can actually gain and be able to borrow money quicker, faster. You know it's happening. Okay, I was with the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday, and they gave him 3 balls, and he said to see which one was going to predict the future more accurately to change, and he went with technology and AI in particular. Okay, it's not a gamble. We know where it's going, and that's a great equalizer. Digitalization is a great equalizer, provided you embrace it. You see, there's not just an opportunity in Thailand. You can look inward if you want, but Thailand would miss an incredible opportunity. It needs to look outward. It needs to look global. And sometimes people look at places like Switzerland and Singapore, and we all have an image in our mind. You know, you say Switzerland, what do you think? You might think chocolate, but lots of us think, oh, wow, that's super good, and they're banking. Sometimes you can overestimate other people and underestimate yourself. It starts with a self-image. It starts with knowing that you can compete. Thailand can become a global hub. There's so many countries that are in tradition, and Thailand has great tradition. We can't just have tradition, though, in Europe, and obviously I come from Europe. There's many countries, they're stuck in their tradition. They won't change. They think the old world's staying. Well, guess what? I've got news for them. And I'm sure you understand. There's tradition and there's innovation. And innovation is really what it's about. And Thailand is already embracing it. It can take it a stage further and become that global hub. So what are the challenges? And I know someone's going to say, money. Okay, well, yes, of course. But everybody thinks, and that can be an excuse, by the way, that it's just about, if I got money, I'm going to be okay. Okay, well, there's an element of truth to it, but it isn't just that. Do you know there are investors out there? There's actually VC funds, venture capital funds, that want to invest, but they need the right proposition. You need to be able to display it. You need to be able to do the marketing. We live in a world of influencers. We need to look at those and see how they can help. We look at Alex Albon, who's English and Thai, so I'll link with that nicely, the Formula One driver. We need to use those people and use it to enhance the image. And look at the wins, look at the culture, look at the people that succeed. They are the ones that we need to put the spotlight on. Thailand and indeed me. Many in the world are looking inward. Countries are looking inward. We live in a world where there's countries that are just looking after themselves. Okay, that's caused inflation around the world, where countries have become more nationalistic. You'll see it the way they vote. And all of a sudden okay, but that gives an opportunity. Because whilst everybody else is looking inward, yes, it's a challenge to go global, but it can happen. Of course, rules are there. And someone said rules are made to be broken, which is the wrong answer. But rules are there to make sure there's security. At the same time, and I'm not saying this is easy, it's perhaps the biggest challenge for regulators and lawmakers, is to put rules in that make sense and achieve a way of working that reduces friction. Okay, if you can do that, it is the challenge for every single country to make sure that they go for innovation, but also to look at ways that they can reduce some of the friction that's there. There's always going to be some when there's regulations, and so there should be because we need security. But at the same time, we've got to look at sensible rules that give us that flexibility. We look at the challenges, we look at education. We have to embrace it. We have to develop a culture, me, you, everybody. The world changed. Anybody think the world changed in the last 5 years? Anybody not think it's going to change in the next 5? You'd be crazy not to, right? So you have to embrace the fact that every day is a learning opportunity. If you listen to me and you get one idea, it was worth listening, right? And if that idea made you $1 million, it would definitely be worth listening, right? So just think. There are ideas out there. There are people that are prepared to share. And then sharing that information with other Thai people and encouraging them to learn. Because just imagine, if you learnt a little bit every day, how good would you become? Growth is achievable. It is achievable. It's a mindset. You can do it. I can do it. And I want to work with you to try and achieve that. I'm proud to be a part of the National Innovation Agency. I'm proud to be there and for them to share ideas with me and me with them so that we can develop. And of course, there's challenges. Money's one. We mention it. We have to work at it. We can't just expect. But if we embrace the opportunities that there are, embrace the opportunities with technology, just imagine where we can go. Asia has growth. There's no question. You're in the middle of an fantastic growth area. Don't think about coming second or third. Think about go for the win. Because if you go for the moon, you'll hit an eagle. If you go to really try and achieve, which I know so many people are, then there's no limit to actually what can be achieved. Asia's opportunity is incredible. But I would actually argue Thailand's opportunity is bigger than anyone else in Asia. Why? Because it has the culture. It has the right people. The young people in particular, they want to change. They want to develop. They want to do something. They are already embracing entrepreneurship. And of course, we need to see more and more. You may think differently. I'm English, and the weather is crazy. And everybody in England, you know what they do? They moan. They moan when it's cold. They moan when it's raining, and it rains a lot in England if you've ever been there. They moan when it gets hot, because England's not built for hot weather. I mean, there's no air conditioning, right? Because it only happens occasionally. But if you're not careful, and that's what happens to some cultures, they actually get to a stage where they don't realize there's a bright future. There's an emerging generation in Thailand. There's an emerging bunch of people listening to me today that it's my pleasure to talk to that can see an incredible future. All I'm going to say to you is you have all the ingredients to grab, take, embrace, and achieve an incredible future of your own. Asia's future's bright, but guess what? Thailand's future is even brighter. Embrace it, go for it. Pleasure to have been here and had the opportunity to share some ideas. Just remember, the future is what you make it. Okay, it's up to each of us to create our own by working hard and diligently and realizing the opportunity that we have. Thank you so much.
For the knowledge and the experiences that you have shared with us on this topic, as can see many things that Thailand can moving forward to become a global fintech hub. So up next, we would like to continue to the next topic, which we are going to discuss about venture capital and startups in climate tech. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite former CEO SCB10X and venture partner, the Radical Fund. Could you please give a big round of applause to Mr. Paul Ak, Kun Ponrapak Akra Pridi, please.
Thank you to the NIA for having me here. I am here to talk a little bit about climate tech. It is one of those sectors that's getting a lot of attention, but is quite new in Southeast Asia. And so I'm always fielding a lot of questions about what is climate tech, what's happening in Southeast Asia, is it the next big thing, is it a trend? So for those of you who may not be as familiar with climate tech, hopefully you'll walk away with something new. And for those that have some familiarity, hopefully you'll learn a little bit more as well. I'd like to start with a little quiz, and I'm not gonna collect any tests. I'm not gonna ask for any raised hands, but I want you to just think through the answers and maybe answer it in your head. And I want to start by asking, how much does Southeast Asia contribute to global ocean plastic waste? So how much of the plastic waste in our oceans is from Southeast Asian countries? Is it 17%? Is it 37%? Is it 57%? Or is it 77%? So keep that answer in your head. And if you guessed 57%, you're correct. We, as a world, are drowning in plastic. There are 67 metric tons of plastic in our oceans today, and we are adding 1 ton of plastic every year. We are basically throwing it out in our landfills, in our rivers, and it is finding its way into the oceans. Asia and South Asia, so basically all of Asia Pac, as well as India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, we collectively account for 80% of all the plastic that's in our oceans. And just Southeast Asia alone accounts for nearly 60%. 57% of all the plastic in our oceans today is from the countries in ASEAN. And to put that in a little bit of perspective, basically studies have shown that each of us consume the equivalent of 1 credit card's worth of microplastic every week. We're either eating it through our food supply or we're inhaling microplastics in our air. So I tell people, if you want to get a sense of it, just take a credit card out of your wallet and eat 1 per week for a year. See how that feels. And studies have also, scientists are estimating that by 2050, we're going to have more plastic in our oceans than sea life by weight. So just something to start off. Hopefully, Nigel sort of picked you up. I'm here to depress you a little bit. Sorry about that. I'm also going to ask you a second question. Here's a second quiz. How many people globally will be vulnerable to rising sea levels by 2050? Is it 150 million people around the world? Is it 170? Is it 200? Or is it 300? Okay, so whichever answer you picked, you're right. Estimates are showing that by 2050, anywhere between 150 to 200 million people will be affected by or displaced by rising sea levels. And if we include people that are impacted by the increasing frequency of flash floods, then that number potentially jumps up to 300 million. We in Southeast Asia are characterized by a lot of coastal cities that are threatened by rising sea levels over the next few decades. Scientists are saying that large parts of Bangkok could be under threat or underwater by 2050 and larger sections could disappear by the end of the century. So this is a map of Bangkok right here. That arrow shows where we are now. Everything in red is potentially a floodplain in the next 25 years. Okay, so a little bit of a bummer. I don't want to, I spent the last few minutes depressing you. Hopefully we'll pick you up over the next 10 minutes or so. This is probably one of my favorite cartoons that came out during the COVID-19 crisis. And the message was, while we're focused on COVID-19, let us not forget that there are bigger crises that come up behind that, and the biggest one being climate change. So we've largely, I don't want to say we've conquered COVID-19. We're still seeing waves of COVID-19. People are still contracting COVID-19. But COVID-19 is a tiny problem compared to the tidal wave that is known as climate change. Now, as a venture capitalist and as someone that basically invests in opportunities, for investors like me, crises equals investment opportunities. Where there is a problem, there is money to be made. And so if we look at something like COVID-19, even though that was a crisis that impacted the world, during that period, during those years of COVID-19 were the best years for the medical technology sector. In 2021, the med tech sector saw a record high of venture capital investment of almost $10 billion. And that's come down a little bit in the following year, in 2022, largely because I think the anxiety around COVID-19 has died down a bit. But if we think about where climate is going, in just last year, 2020 was the best year on record for venture capital money into climate tech investment, $70 billion, which was twice as much as the year before. So it is a big problem that is attracting big attention and even bigger money. And so estimates are showing that next year, or this year, sorry, by the end of 2023, that money will fall. But this is not because of climate. 2023 has been a tough year for the venture capital industry in general. We've seen a lot of financial crises like Silicon Valley Bank, the crypto crash of last year. So confidence in venture capital has been a little bit shaky. Climate is not immune to that. But even with the cut in half, it is still the second best year on record for climate tech investments. So let me take a pause to explain a little bit about how to think about climate, because climate is a big, broad, vague term. When people say climate, people think different things about climate. But for those that may be less familiar, I want to give you a simple binary model. I want you to think about climate in terms of either what's called mitigation or adaptation. And so climate mitigation is basically any sort of solution that tackles the cause of climate change, which is greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So any startup that is in climate mitigation is trying to either reduce or remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So we're basically saying, how do we slow down the world from getting warmer than it already is? Climate adaptation it doesn't deal with the causes, but it deals with the effects. How do we deal with the impacts of climate change? We're going to live in a warmer world no matter what. Mitigation is trying to slow that down. But we are living in a warmer world. We are seeing greater frequency of floods, droughts, hurricanes, heat waves. And so climate adaptation says, what technologies can we use to adapt to a warmer world? And so everyone in the climate investment space is thinking in terms of one of these two sort of categories. And that doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. There are a lot of technologies that do both mitigation and adaptation. But if you're not familiar with climate, this is a good way of thinking about how to tackle problems in climate tech. How do we attack the cause, and how do we deal with the impact? And so when we talk about climate tech, it's not just one area of technology. Climate covers a wide variety of different sectors, everything from renewable energy to battery storage to agriculture and food, to what's called circular economy, to the built environment, meaning property, to mobility, how we move, how we transport ourselves. So climate, when people say climate, climate can cover almost anything. Everything has some sort of climate impact. If we look at Southeast Asia, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Southeast Asia is at that critical juncture where we're going to see major climate impacts over the next few decades. But Southeast Asia is also going to be the source of many innovative climate solutions. We have a very young population. We have growing economies. We have markets that have unique competitive advantages in developing climate solutions. But they're not uniform. So if we look at each of the countries in turn, we talk about Southeast Asia as a whole, but it really is 10 different markets. And each of those markets have a different contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but also different ways of tackling that in different pledges. So, if we look at, say, the top 3 contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, we also have very, very different projections on when we're going to get to net zero, anything from 2050 all the way up to 2065, so a 15-year variance, as well as how much we plan to reduce our contribution to greenhouse gas by 2030. So there is no uniform strategy across the region. It's quite diverse. And that's largely because every country in ASEAN has a different emissions profile. What the main causes in each market is very different. So if we take, for example, Thailand and Vietnam, so energy is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions from those countries. Whereas in Indonesia, it's largely nature-based, it's deforestation. So different causes require different sets of solutions. There is no one size fits all when it comes to climate in Southeast Asia. Now getting back, as I mentioned, 2022 was a record year for climate VC globally. And the same is true for Southeast Asia. You could see that the curve is quite extreme. It's exponential. We saw a huge boost just in the last few years. During the COVID-19 crisis, we saw a lot of global climate incidents around the world, and we saw funding to climate in Southeast Asia go through the roof. And so last year, this chart only goes to November of last year, but it was a record year where we saw over $1 billion in venture capital go into climate startups. And so it's not even just the absolute number. So that's what's happened in the past. We saw record numbers in the past. What about the future? Well, we have quite a large universe and a growing universe of venture capital and private equity funds that are now raising money to invest in climate around the world, including Southeast Asia. So collectively, there's at least $5 billion in funds being raised right now to invest in climate into markets that include Southeast Asia. It's not all for Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia is a big piece of that. And so we are now in a region in Southeast Asia where climate tech is now about 7.8% of all VC dollars. So 8 out of every $100 going into fintech, e-commerce, ag tech, 8% is going to climate. And that number is only going to get bigger over time. If we look at where in Southeast Asia that 1 billion plus is going to, the majority of it is Singapore. Singapore is about 80% of all climate tech investments. And that's because the majority of startups tend to register in Singapore. So this doesn't mean that these are all startups that are based in Singapore or only serve the Singaporean market. You have many companies like, say, Grab that are registered in Singapore but serve all of Southeast Asia. But after Singapore, Indonesia is the next biggest investment market for climate, which is not surprising because Indonesia has the largest population. And then followed by Vietnam, Thailand, and then the rest of ASEAN. What's quite interesting is that I think where most people think of climate, if I say climate to most people, they'll think of one of two things. Most people will either think of electric vehicles or they'll think of solar. But if you look at where the money is going to, it's actually very, very diverse. If we look at the deal volume, the green pie chart, you see that it's actually a very diverse split on where the money is going to. Everything from food and agriculture, renewable energy, waste management, sustainable buildings. It is a broad diversity of where the money is going to. And if we look at where the deal value is, so this is the number of deals, the other one is the actual dollars, 40% is still renewable energy. Because energy, as we saw in earlier charts, is one of the major, if not the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in many countries in Southeast Asia. But the other 60% is actually a pretty diverse mix of industries. I have about 15 seconds. I'm probably going to take about 30 seconds, but let me end off with a few takeaways. Try to keep it simple. Climate is hitting that inflection point. So when we talk about an S-curve, we're talking about that point on the S-curve where things go off like a rocket. And that's what we're seeing in climate tech globally and climate tech in Southeast Asia. Climate is not just one or two industries. It's not just solar. It's not just electric vehicles. It is a broad, diverse group of technologies across the board. And the thing about climate is that it won't go away. So when we had the crypto crash, people just went back to using regular money. Most people were using regular money anyways. The thing with climate is that if the money dries up, the problems don't go away. There will always be problems in climate, which means that there's always going to be people trying to solve those opportunities. I just want to start off with just spending a second talking about, me. I have to make that pitch. I work for a company called the Radical Fund. The Radical Fund is an early stage venture capital fund focused on climate problems in Southeast Asia. So just like all the problems I've talked about earlier in this presentation, these are the things that Radical Fund is tackling. We're not the only ones out there, but there are any number of firms out there, but right now you see someone from Radical in front of you. So if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about what we're doing, if you're in the climate space, just want to talk about climate, would love to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul Ark, for your insights. So now, in the series of shaping the future of tech startup in Thailand, we have heard about a fintech hub, also the climate tech, and also up next we are going to talk about the energy as well. So the next topic that our distinguished speaker are going to deliver in the topic of decarbonization driving sustainable energy transition in Thailand. Please welcome Executive Vice President, Innovation and New S-Curve Business Development from Bangja Corporation PCL. Please give a big round of applause to คุณระวีบุญสินสุข
สวัสดีครับ Thank you NIA for having me here today. I think it's a good opportunity for me to add an interesting topic into this discussion, which is on the energy perspective. Okay, and actually thank you, Paul, that you actually put a perfect scene for me to dive deep down a little bit on the energy sector. So just want to let you know how much of the energy that we consume a year. So in terms of the scientific number, we see 1.5 exajoule, which is actually for me, I have no idea what it's about. So basically, it's the kind of energy that the Boeing 747 can fly around the world for 100,000 times. That is just one energy consumption for a day for the globally. Or if even for Thailand, it basically allow 4 months. So the globally energy that consumed for 1 day for globally, Thailand we can consume for 4 months. So it's really big number for energy consumption for global. And we talk a lot about the climate tech, climate change, everything, and everyone actually point out to this energy consumption as a bad guy. So let's see how we're going to mitigate or how we're going to deal with this problem. Oops. So once we convert that 1.7 exajoule to the per day to the per year is around 624 exajoule. But this is not the number that I want you to remember or to take away. Everyone talk about the net zero scenario, and that will require two things. First one, you need to reduce your energy consumption. You will see the gray one, the gray which is fossil fuel, from 80% total or from the total energy consumption to around 20%. And then you have to develop that green, which is renewable energy, and the blue one as well as a renewable energy. So basically, you have to reduce your today fossil consumption 80% and replace that with renewable energy. This is for net zero scenario, which is I would say very unlikely for us to achieve this very aggressive target. So I think in the most likely case, the energy consumption should be increased in the total number from like 620 to 740. And we still cannot develop that green energy fast enough to meet the net zero target. So I think that's the main key takeaway message for today, that the net zero target is actually really good for everyone, but it's really hard to meet that target. Okay, this one I would like to introduce you we call it energy dilemma. There's three concern or three perspective that we need to discuss. Once we're talking about the energy. First one, energy security. So we want to make sure that everyone still have the good access to the energy. For example, this is a very big problem early this year. Early last year when we have the Russia and Ukraine situation. In Europe area, basically, they are face this kind of energy security problem. So they cannot have the access to the gas, which they like. That is energy security. And the next one is actually the energy around the sustainability. So we need green energy to meet that, to address the climate change problem, right? And we also have to address the energy affordability. Because if you put your resources or your effort into just one tip, if you want to secure all the energy security, you probably might have to give away the sustainable. Because the most secure energy is actually fossil fuel, which cannot give you sustainable perspective. Again, if you put your everything on the sustainable, you probably cannot get the security. And as we all know, all of the green energy is still quite expensive compared to the fossil fuel. So we need to have a good balance on this energy dilemma here. And when I skip this, so what we're going to, how innovation can address this problem. As we are energy company, right, we focus on these two areas. So basically, we still want to focus how to work on the fossil-based energy still. I would like to put up this example, like now fossil fuel, we kind of frame it as a very dirty energy, very bad. We want to get rid of it. But I want to put it this way. COVID, for example, when people got infected by COVID, instead you don't kill that people, right? You actually try to remove COVID away. Same here. I think the problem for the fossil fuel is actually the carbon in it, not the fossil energy itself. So we should have to come up with some kind of technology to make it low or actually zero carbon emission. And together, we still have to develop the green energy as well. Let's see what kind of technology that we can work on this angle. For sure, carbon capture is, and then carbon capture and storage and utilization. I think for the storage, we all know about the technology already. It's actually put it underground or put for the depleted oil well or into that kind of geological structure that can hold that carbon dioxide. But I want to take a look at, introduce you a little bit on the carbon utilization. Actually, for the chemical process, actually quite common technology for now. But I think the most interesting one for now is actually for the biological process. Just want to walk you through. Basically, right now you can put your carbon dioxide into a reactor, so-called bioreactor, and it will give you something like protein. Basically, change from the carbon dioxide to food, which will address a lot of problem. You don't have to have the big area to do the farming, and that's also like, I would say the twice effect on this. You can reduce carbon dioxide, and then you can reduce the land use as well. This, for example, is a biological process for carbon utilization. And for the green energy, is there any technology that we want to take a look? I think for the renewable, I don't want to go to the solar and wind, because that is actually most common for us right now. But I think the one who will make that renewable energy works and can fly in this environment is actually battery. And the battery now, basically, lithium is, for me, is actually like common already. It's common technology. And we probably might want to see something like a sodium battery, because the sodium battery is, compared to lithium, it's a lot cheaper to produce the sodium battery. Also the vanadium, which have a very good characteristic for the battery for the ESS or energy storage system. And also hydrogen, we all heard about the several color of hydrogen, blue, green, gray, and now we have gold hydrogen coming up. And as well the nuclear, which is nuclear, I believe that it's going to be the good answer for the climate tech still. We'll take a look a little bit on this one I already mentioned about the sodium ion battery, which will make the battery more accessible, and in terms of the kind, I would say like energy affordability, we make the battery system price go down a lot, which is many players already working on that. For example, the big name CATL. And this one I think is quite interesting. It's so-called super capacitory. It's basically combine the advantage of the lithium battery and capacitor. Because lithium battery right now is still have to work on how to make it able to fast charging. But the capacitor, they have this character that can join in like high power and high energy, and then you get the super capacitory, which is quite interesting. There are couples of the startup that are working on this concept. Gold hydrogen basically is from the depleted petroleum resources. You put in some kind of bacteria or microbia in deep down into the reservoir, and then instead of you get the oil, you get just the pure hydrogen out of the petroleum reservoir. Okay, and actually this one is actually what Bangchak we are actually doing right now. We have the so-called BIIC, Bangchak Initiative and Innovation Center. And what we are doing, actually, we try to incubate any ideas, both internal and external ideas, and we try to incubate them to scale up them and try to make them have their own life, and also the partnership with several strategic partners, and then we want to create the ecosystem for this innovation idea around this. With Noni, actually this one is a Bangchak startup, and we try to incubate them, we try to scale up them. I think most of the Bangkok, Bangkok people can already experience this with Noni already. But this is kind of an example for Bangja that we try to incubate this startup. Also partnership, we partner a lot with the university, research institution, and all the startup that we can bring in their technology. We can do the proof of concept with us, and probably we can get some good traction out of this technology. Ecosystem as well. So we initiate Biosphere and SynBio Consortium because this is one that we try to focus on the biotech, I would say, because biotech will be one good engine to attack the climate change problem as well, because Thailand, we are agriculture country, so we have a lot of the biotech knowledge which still cannot scale up, so we try to build this ecosystem. We can talk a lot with all of the biotech startup, and we try to make it scale up and make it material development with them. And I think that would be it for me, and I'm looking forward to the later discussion after I think a couple of minutes from now. Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you very much Mr. Ravi Bunsinsuk from Bangja Corporation PCL. Yes, of course. We have heard from our three distinguished speakers share their insights and the knowledge in each individual topic. But up next, we are going to set up for like the panel discussion in the topic of shaping the future of tech startup in Thailand. So in this forum, it's going to provide an insights and discussion on the investment landscape for tech startups in Thailand with a focus on shaping the future. So I believe that with the right ecosystem support, Thailand has the potential to become a regional hub for innovation and entrepreneurship, thereby shaping and also are going to expand our potential and their skills. So right now, distinguished guests, I would like to invite back on stage once again our speaker. Please start from Mr. Paul Ark, คุณพลพัฒน์พลพัฒน์อัครปรีดี up on the stage, and also คุณระวีบุญสินสุข. Please welcome. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite our moderator, Dr. ภูมิพรธรรมสถิตเดช Please welcome.
Hi guys. Well, I'm a bit sad that Nigel left us, but at the same time, I'm quite happy because Nigel mentions a lot of things about fintech, but both of you guys focus pretty much on the same line, which is climate tech and clean tech and energy tech. As far as I'm concerned, Paul, you have done a lot about fintech before, and out of your own interest that you changed from fintech to ESG tech. Could you explain a little bit about ESG trends and this sort of, energy tech, climate tech, and all those clean tech? How are they, related to each other?
Sure. No, happy to talk a bit about that. I think you're right. I was originally a fintech investor. I launched the fintech fund for Siam Commercial Bank back in 2016 and ran that fund for 4 years. And I came out of that because I actually had a much stronger personal interest around sustainability. So I think now it's a very popular word. ESG is a very popular buzzword, but in 2019, 2020, people weren't really talking about it. So I think that the one thing I always talk about when I talk about ESG, ESG is a very big thing right now. It's very political in the U.S., where I'm originally from, and I think like sustainability and like climate, it's talked about a lot, but it's, I think, unfortunately little understood. And so I always tell people ESG is about risk management. It is looking at environmental risk, it's looking at social risk, and it's looking at governance risk and how a company or an organization could look at those risks and manage those risks in a way that makes the company more resilient. So every company looks at risk. They look at their operating risk, they look at their financial risk, they look at their technology risk, and all ESG is doing is it's basically saying, let's make sure that we're covering all the available risks that are out there. And what's quite interesting is that very few people were talking about ESG before 2020. And then in 2020, we had a global pandemic. We had wildfires across Australia and North America. We had flash floods, in Europe. We got supply chain disruption issues. We had the Evergreen tanker get stuck in, the Panama Canal. We had Russia invade Ukraine. So every possible major global risk you can think of, the world has experienced just in the last few years alone. And so I think the growth in ESG is really a natural offshoot of the fact that we've experienced so many different risks that the world was not prepared for. That now the world is asking, and companies are asking, and people in the audience are asking, how do we prepare for the next pandemic? How do we prepare for the next flood or wildfire or heat wave? How do we prepare for the next potential conflict? And so
basically, ESG is something that inevitable. Any big corporations, large or small, they cannot survive without thinking about it.
everyone should be thinking about it. So, so you use the term ESG tech. I tell people ESG is not its own industry. It's not like the financial industry, agriculture, healthcare, and ESG. ESG is not its own industry.
Right.
ESG is about risk. And so I tell people every company should be doing ESG in terms of ESG risk. And of ESG, the biggest one of those is the E. It's the environmental, which leads us to now why climate is getting so much attention. Because of all the different ESG risks out there, climate seems to be the biggest one now. And that's why, why myself, why Kun Rawi is here on stage to talk about what is probably going to be one of the biggest issues of our time.
Right, so ESG is a trend. Climate change is something that is inevitable as well. We have to do something about it. But from the venture capital perspective, are there enough, let's say, for the last few years in terms of startups? Well, basically, if you have enough money to spend and invest, are there enough startups for you to look for? Or you would like to see more sort of numbers of startups that would, trying to manage their sort of portfolio or technology to change this sort of climate behavior?
I'm going to give you two answers to that question. Yes and no.
No.
So I think during my presentation, I talked about how people look at climate differently. Everyone looks at climate very differently. A lot of folks that are looking at climate in Southeast Asia, particularly the very big funds, when they think climate, they think, generally energy and renewables or solar, or they think about electric vehicles and mobility. And those are very, very big components of climate technology. And if you just think of climate as those two industries, is there enough early stage startups? I'm going to say no. There needs to be a lot more. But if you look at the fact that every company in this hall has some sort of climate impact, some of it might be very small, but some of it might be very big. So for example, I'm not going to ask people to raise hands, but if I were to ask people in the audience, how many people spent a lot of time on Zoom and FaceTime, either for work or school during COVID-19, I'm going to guess everyone here is going to raise your hand.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that for every day that you spent on Zoom, that's probably at least 2 to 4 hours of time that you weren't spending in your car. So if you tell me, if someone says, is Zoom a climate tech company? Zoom will say no. But if you ask, does Zoom have a climate impact?
Yes.
If you could sit there and say, Zoom actually reduces the amount of time people will spend in a car, and if you measure that, and more importantly, if you manage that, then Zoom is potentially a really interesting climate investment opportunity. And so when you ask me, are there enough climate startups out there? I'm going to say yes, but many startups don't think they're climate, and they don't think about how do you manage that impact. And what's important is that as a VC, if you manage that climate impact, there are always the opportunities to reduce your cost or increase your revenue, which from a business perspective is great for revenue and profitability. So my job as a VC is to find the startups out there that have potentially large climate impacts and to work with them and say, yes, I know that you're focused on selling X number of items or you're trying to basically sell this service, but let's also look at what you're doing on the climate side and see, can you reduce costs, make money for your company and for me as one of your investors?
I think as a VC, you have this sort of free range perspectives on how would you define that particular startup would cope with different kind or different goals of ESG. But from corporate perspective, Kun Ravi, because you mentioned that Bangchak seemed to focus pretty much on energy startup. From your point of view, are there enough startup that provide opportunities for you to choose or to select to partner with from the last, let's say, few years?
Thank you. Before that, I would like to second the Paul idea about the ESG. I think it's very important because, I think not only the VC or CVC, when we look into this perspective, I think all the when you want to do any finance or any investment, all the banks, they will require us to do something ESG. Otherwise, they will walk away, basically. So let's get back to your questions. I think it's very difficult to answer, but one thing that I can say that because we focus on energy startup, right? I think we want to have more impact. More impact on any technology from that startup, because I think the number of startup will not tell anything. I think, but I think the numbers that we want to have is actually impact from that technology, if it can be developed into the commercial scale or something, right? I think that would be our focus area that we want to see. For example, if we want to work on any energy tech startup, we will see what kind of the potential that this technology will address that climate change problem. So I think we focus on that number rather than the numbers of the startup.
Right, because the main reason that I ask, because I would like to understand the supply side of it, because I would like to see a lot of people mention something like, Thailand, we have a lot of opportunity, we have a lot of startups, but when we focus pretty much on specific perspective, would there be enough startup for us to...
I'd love to comment on that just because I spent 4 years during corporate innovation, particularly for Siam Commercial Bank. So the thing is that there's a bit of startup activity in Thailand. And what's interesting is that a lot of venture capital funding that is in Thailand, much of that is corporate money. So Thailand is quite unique in the sense that a lot of the homegrown venture capital funds in Thailand are predominantly corporates. It's SCB 10X, it's Krungsi Finovate, it's SCG Ad Ventures, it's PTT Espresso. You have a small number of funds that aren't corporates. You have 500 tuk-tuks. But the amount of money that comes from the corporate side is almost 20 to 1. Now, the challenge is, it's not that is there enough startups, but are there enough startups that are tackling the problems that are important to the corporates that have money to invest? And that's the challenge, because I'll say that when I was running the fund for Siam Commercial Bank, many of the startups in Thailand were tackling a lot of consumer problems. They were solving problems for consumers. Food delivery, e-commerce, all very important for a tech ecosystem. But as a corporate VC, I was looking for startups that were solving the problems that a bank needs. So not B2C, not business to consumer. I was looking for business to business solutions. And so what wound up happening is that much of the investment capital that SCB had went to startups overseas because we're looking around the world for bank solutions. And I think if you look at all of the corporates in Thailand, from the energy sector to the industrial sector to the property sector, it is a very similar experience. You know, most of the biggest corporate VCs in Thailand have diverse international portfolios because they were looking for solutions to their problems. And so, you know, are there a lot of startups in Thailand? Sure. Are there enough startups that are interesting to corporate VCs? That's the challenge.
Right. It would lead me to have another question on, due to the COVID crisis, it impact actually have a profound sort of deep root behavior in both startup behavior, because they don't actually have time to really think about new ideas. Probably a lot of young generation would think about how to survive. At the same time, big corporations or venture capitalists probably now be a little bit more sensitive in terms of investment. So has it been any changes for the last few years regarding VC market investment? Has it been more sensitive? Has it more vigilant? What do you think, Kun Ravi?
I think, yes, I think I see some kind of the development, both good and bad. I start with the bad one. I think the picture about the tidal wave. I think the recession is actually impact a lot into the VC or startup investment industry. I mean, most of the VC or funds, they become more cautious. And this will impact many startups, because those startups, they will need continuous of the funding, right? Yes, you can see them Series A, and then if they cannot raise another round, Series B, they're gone.
Yeah.
No matter how good the technology is, right? And in this particular situation, this actually happening right now. So most of the startup will get the down round valuation in the next round. So this will actually not good for this startup industry. And probably as a VC or as a corporate VC, we probably might need to take a look a little bit. For example, if we quite confident that the technology is the technology, we probably might need to step in somehow and try to make them survive, and waiting for the rise of the next rise of the startup investment cycle, I would say.
I'll provide a slightly different viewpoint from Kun Rawi, in the sense that, the last couple of years have been rough for startups. COVID-19, the recession, the crypto crash. So has it been good for the health of startups in Thailand? Definitely not. But I think in terms of the long-term health of the startup ecosystem, I would say all of it has been fantastic. And what I mean by that, and that's going to sound very weird, but our startup ecosystem in Thailand largely sort of came about starting in maybe 2012. And so for the first 8 years, anyone who was a first-time entrepreneur, maybe a few years out of university, they were born into a startup market that only went up. And so we had a generation of entrepreneurs that didn't know how to manage through a crisis. They didn't know how to deal with financial discipline. They didn't have any cash discipline. And so, when I talk to people, I say it's the difference between sort of quote unquote a peacetime CEO versus a wartime CEO. Startups that go through a crisis and come out on the other side, they come out very different. The CEOs have a very different mentality towards how they manage their businesses. And it doesn't matter if you succeed or fail. Startups are risky to begin with. So if I see a startup go through a crisis or half a dozen crises that we've gone through, and if they fail but they go back into startups, they're going to go back with a lot of wisdom. If they survive, then they're going to build their companies very differently than what it was before the crisis, but they're going to have a lot of wisdom. And I think that is very, very healthy for any ecosystem, is experienced entrepreneurs that know how to manage during good times and know how to manage during bad times. So I will agree with Kunrawi that the last couple of years have been horrible for startups. But in terms of the long-term capability development of our ecosystem, I think it's been not just great, it's necessary.
Well, if you focus on those startups who probably won some money for the last 5 years, I think whoever survives is going to come out stronger, that's for sure. But what about the incoming young entrepreneurs, probably from university, new startups? Do you think that they're going to have a better capabilities from, mental learning, technical learning, not just only from their sort of senior startups who will either survive or fail, but also from these sort of panel discussions? Because I think 8 years ago, it's just more like a specific community. Just all those who have technical skills and had opportunities to study abroad, they come back and they just basically start from copy other people, business ideas. But now it's changed. People start having their own ideas. People have different kind of technical skills. But due to COVID crisis, all those has been disrupted. But now it's changed to another sort of scenarios that the young generations going to change. What do you think would be the most profound change that would happen to the young startup in the new coming era?
I think it depends. I think that's a fairly lesson learned is already there. It's up to them if they're going to utilize or capitalize that valuable experience from the previous generation or not. But I think one thing that we can, as a VC or corporate VC, we can try to help them, right? Because we know we've been there, done that, but not yet, right? So we can help them to emphasize them that they need to. I think basically the new generation, I think they have very, very great idea or great technology, but still I think cash discipline is actually the most common common tipping point for those failed startup. So we can probably be their mentor on this particular topic area, right? For the cash discipline, and we try to help them to scale up, because I think the market is actually very important for them to keep them growing. So I think as a VC we can help them, but still depends on how they want to learn from us or to learn from their previous generation.
Well, I think for young generation, I'm just going to give you some example. Students from my class, I give them assignment, and a few of them make something like 200,000 per month from YouTube. And they basically came to me and asked, what good should I get from doing your assignment? Because now I'm making something like 200,000 baht per month. And also they have these sort of their own directions about what they would like to be. And when we try to, not to convince them, but to give them more information regarding opportunities in the future. Let's say, back to Kun Paul, you mentioned that there is a strong growth of climate tech in the future. Would it actually help for younger generation to learn that, this is a great opportunity for you. You should not just only listen to it, but you should start study. You should start trying to do something about it. Maybe you can develop your own startup. Should we, as a VC or CVC, go and engage with them to that, detail? Or should we just, we're going to leave and see how things goes?
That's a great question. To be completely honest, I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. In the sense that, okay, so I'm gonna say first off, I don't have kids, but I can only imagine that for those that have children, trying to tell your child what's good for them, more often than not, you probably have children that just don't want to listen to you. And I don't want to sound condescending, but I imagine that probably dealing with students like that who are like, why should I listen to you? I'm kind of doing my own thing is probably not too different than having my own kids. And, you know, I come from a place of, 30 plus years of work experience. I think I have things worth sharing. But I'm at the point in my career where I look for I'm in a situation where if people come to me seeking to learn and seeking advice, I'm happy to share. But I've gotten past the point where I go out there saying, you need to listen to me because you're young, I'm old. Because one, I realize they don't always want to listen. Two, they probably need to make their own mistakes anyways. And also three, I've been doing this long enough to know that I'm not always right either. Sometimes there are plenty of young people in Thailand that are making way more money than I am and are far more successful as TikTok influencers than I am. So I don't have all the answers. And so I don't want to say that there are things they need to learn because we operate in a world where people can make phenomenal amounts of money as an influencer on TikTok. We live in a world where, you could get a lot of answers and you can do a lot of things just by talking to ChatGPT or some sort of conversational AI. We live in a world where I don't know what will be the guaranteed success factors into the future because I came from a very different era. So, it's challenging. Does that mean that we probably need to rethink what education looks like at primary school, at secondary school, at university? Absolutely. And I know you're trying to figure that out with, those that you teach. I think we're talking, backstage that I'm about to be appointed as a faculty member at a university. I'm trying to figure out what that curriculum needs to look like. Because if I were teaching college students from 20 years ago, I know exactly what to teach them. But how to teach university students today, they probably know more than I do.
I think the reason that I raise this issue because most of the startup that you see nowadays basically are from university, especially all those engineering students. And at the university, we're trying to provide some sort of startup activities. And part of it, we even provide them with direction as well. Something like aging population. And then we just try to stimulate their thoughts. What would you like to do to solve aging problems, issues? And would it be possible for you to come up with some ideas? And in order to build the sort of sustainable ecosystem for startup in Thailand, at least from my perspective, especially if you think that Thailand can be a hub for climate tech, it is unavoidable as well for VC and CVC to make connection with university and have some sort of linkage or even some sort of activities that could design to stimulate students to start thinking about it. The question would be, how far should VC and CVC should go and provide this sort of arm and support in order to not secure, but at least to stimulate this sort of startup ecosystem in Thailand?
I think the key word would be we need to provide them the support. I mean, we will be there. I mean, for them, we will make ourselves ready for them. Because as Paul said, we cannot teach them anything today, right? Probably they know a lot better than us, but we are here to support them. I mean, if they want to know about how we're going to secure the market, yes, we can. We've been there and that in the last previous generation, but we don't know it's actually going to work for this generation. But if they think this is worthwhile experience for them to learn, yes, we're ready for them. I think we can make that as a support campaign or activities. I think that would be good enough for them, because if you put it as a very solid campaign or very solid.
Let me paint another perspective, because I used to be a director of business incubator at a university.
Yeah.
The problem is that when students or professors or researchers, they normally have this sort of idea, and they will think that, you know what, it is a great, brilliant ideas. People are going to love it. And we say something like, I don't think so. And then they're going to ask us, what should we do? I said, you can do anything you like, and then they're going to keep coming back with the same idea again. So we try to change things a little bit by providing them with some sort of, not specific direction, but to give them some sort of guideline to think about it. I think your example about biotechnology it's one of the things which I think is brilliant, because we have a lot of biotechnologies, but they focus pretty much on food rather than climate tech. But when you mention something like, you know what, you can change your biotechnology to that direction, I think a lot of students or even researchers or professors at university, they don't see these opportunities. So basically, it just comes back to how can we stimulate people's thoughts to go in that not specific directions, like you really have to develop these specific solution or technologies, but rather to really start thinking about climate change problems. Would it be possible for your technology to do something about it?
I think one way to address your problem, actually, you have to let them go out to the world, to the market. If they're really confident that their idea is actually really good, go out to the market, right? I mean, if they can raise fund with that idea, yes, it's basically someone actually believe in that idea as well. So I think for the university or academic sector, I think it's not, yes, we can comment based on our opinion that this is going to work or not. But I think probably sometimes we need to let them go out to the market and talk to people. The more people they talk, actually, the better they're going to be. Because actually, this kind of technology is actually I cannot find by myself, right? It's actually when I'm go out to travel or go to talk to all investors and talk to the university, then I can find this kind of idea, right? So basically, you need to make sure that you equip them with the good, good opportunity to meet those people that can help them, and both in terms of the investor and technology wise.
So let me rephrase it in another way. What do you think would be key challenges for CVC to look for clean tech or energy tech startup in the near future?
For CVC as a corporate VC, I think for what we actually want to look for actually is any technology that we can take it back and to the group to add value to the group, like for Bangchak, to make any synergy value out of that. So we pretty much focus on the technology viability or the impact of that technology. So basically for CVC, because the financial return will be not our first priority, right? But we need something that can help to for example, Bangchak, we have a refineries, right? Which we emit like 1 million ton a year, carbon dioxide. So if we can invest in a startup that can make that carbon dioxide disappear some way, somehow, that would be perfect for us. And if they can do that, basically they can go out to the market and the return, on the financial will be follow as well, right? So basically we, as a CVC, we focus on the technology.
Right. Kun Paul, what would be your key challenges to look for climate tech startup in the near future?
I think for us, again, it gets back to, because I'm not corporate, so I'm basically looking for investments for investment return. But it's really finding the startups that we think are addressing impacts in a meaningful way. And again, we're not doing this for brand reputation or for that warm feeling. We're here to invest in technologies that will scale and make money, but doing that through climate impacts. So, like I said, I mean, I'm not limited to just, I'm only doing hydrogen or I'm only doing battery. I have a very wide scope of investment. But the trick is, can I find companies that either think along those lines of climate impact? So maybe I'm an e-commerce company and I'm trying to figure out how to reduce the waste
Right.
in my inventory. Or, you know, I am a food tech company or an ag tech company. How do I reduce the amount of waste? How do I reduce the amount of chemical fertilizer? You know, just thinking through those impacts. And it's either finding the startups that will think through those impacts or the companies that are willing to work with me and my group to think through those impacts. And again, not for the sake of reducing the impact, but how do we tie that impact to reduced cost or increased revenue? And so, you know, again, it gets back to our earlier point. I don't think the challenge for me is the lack of startups. It's finding the right startups, tackling the right problems, who have the right attitude to work with me to solve those problems and make money doing it.
So it's something that can match your interest and the goals of your investing. That would be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think as VCs, we basically say that our job is to kiss a lot of frogs, hoping to find our fairy prince. And it's just that the frogs I have to kiss are going to be different from the frogs that maybe Kunrawi has to kiss.
Right. How can we raise more in terms of capable climate tech startup in Thailand?
I think it's education. You know, I think it starts with people understanding, you know, what does climate mean? What are the impacts? Understanding it from a broad scale. Because I think a lot of people will look at climate from, you know, very specific, like, okay, it's me using it's stopping using plastic straws. And that's one aspect of climate. But climate is our food systems, it's the air we breathe, it's our water systems, it's the fuel we use, it's the amount of time that we run our air conditioning, it's the fertilizer that we use for our plants and food. You know, climate is incredibly broad. And so a lot of what we could do is how do we build that type of education in our traditional education, right? Because, you know, a lot of this, when I started to get into sustainability, I realized that I knew a lot of it. You know, I spent a lot of time studying about how sustainability worked at a mechanical level. And I realized that it all came back to my college level economics classes and my science classes and my accounting classes. It's how you measure it, it's how you look at things. And so how do we take a traditional college education, literature, science, biology, chemistry, economics, accounting, statistics, and adding the climate case studies that say, oh, okay, you know, my kid is learning how to do algebra and calculus, but they're using climate examples now. So they can see that, you know, okay, climate isn't everything that we look at. We just don't see it every day.
So we really have to revolutionize the education system in Thailand. That would be perfect if that can happen. Kunrabi, would you like to add?
I think the government would be another big jigsaw for your questions here, because I mean it's good that we actually start already with the net zero that we pledge to the COP26, right? Yes, I think that will be a good beginning, and then the government need to make sure that they can cascade of the strategy or action plan to meet that target. And one of that for sure going to be education and all the startup environment, and I think everything will follow if you have a really good lineup with all those cascade of the target, the net zero target. That would be really important.
Government policy, education, policy and activities, strategy would be nice. What about organization like NIA? What would you like NIA to do to leverage this sort of climate tech startup?
NIA is a government agency, right?
Yeah, but NIA cannot provide this sort of policy. They basically act as a facilitator rather than providing policy to the government.
So I think this event, something like this, actually help I think because at least we'll bring those startups to meet, people, to meet someone else, in the industry, like VC.
Put more
corporate
people
venture.
like the two of us on stage talking about it. I think that's the start, right? We're here on stage, and hoping that, for those that aren't familiar with climate, like I said, if everyone in this room walked away with one or two things that were new and hadn't thought about, then I think NIA at least did something on climate for this.
I think the perfect sort of ecosystem that NIA would like to see would be the collaboration from the government, industry, and university. And
All stakeholders.
yes,
And that's not just for climate. That's innovation, right? I've been in this ecosystem for the greater part of a decade now. I was on the ground floor when people were trying to figure out corporate innovation. 8 years ago, I'd be sitting on stage trying to explain what corporate innovation is. Now I'm trying to explain climate innovation, and it's the same thing. It's basically, every time there's a problem, if we ask ourselves why hasn't the Thai ecosystem not taken off? Well, I'll tell you, the entrepreneurs will point the fingers at the VCs. The VCs will point the finger at the entrepreneurs. Everyone will point the fingers at government. And then I think the university people will sit there and say, hopefully no one notices, no one points the
Always.
finger at us. But it's everyone. It's consumers. That's why they call it an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a system of different players that interact with each other to create a sustainable system. So if you want to build a startup ecosystem, you have to think about entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, government, academia, consumers. And same thing with climate. Climate is not going to be the responsibility of us pointing the finger at government saying government's not doing enough, or corporates are the bad people, or entrepreneurs don't have enough ideas, or VCs aren't investing it. It does take all of us moving in the same direction. And so what can NIA do is basically be that bridge and say, we're going to work with the government ministries, we're going to work with the universities, we're going to work with the corporates, we're going to work with the VCs, we're going to work with the startups, and let's talk about climate.
right. Are we going to see some sort of shift in terms of platform, like things like carbon credit and those sort of things? Because climate change technology seems to lead to decarbonization, and most of people just looking for the ways to claim it. And now a lot of countries trying to develop this sort of decarbonization market. Would it be possible in the long term that technology would come up and serve climate tech in the future? Would it be any sort of cross or collaboration in the future?
Well, it's possible. So I think it's important to understand that the whole idea of carbon markets and carbon credits is, it's basically how do you put a price on carbon activities? Because we live in a world where, no one pays the price for carbon emissions. It's just something that comes up in the atmosphere, and it's not factored into, our cost of purchasing a car or a house or burning fossil fuels or eating a hamburger. It's just one of those, what they call negative externalities. And so the whole idea of climate is, how do we account for the unaccounted cost of carbon? And does that mean that we charge a tax? Does it mean that we have some sort of financial device that prices carbon? No one wants to talk about taxes. So it's easier to sit there and say, let's put a price on carbon and sell it in the form of an instrument, like you would a share of stock, or like you would a crypto token. So are there opportunities to use fintech? Absolutely. Because are there options to use fintech to do normal transactions? Yes. So I say treat carbon pricing like you would any other economic transaction. And how do you use fintech to make the pricing and trading of carbon assets more efficient?
Right. Would you like to?
I'm agree that actually, I think this fintech and climate tech, it's already happens right now. Yeah, it's actually very, very well joined together. But I think I think the carbon credit market somehow is kind of a hype for now, because actually this market will be, gone when we actually seriously apply the net zero concept, right? At that point,
I'll say carbon markets are a little bit, I think like almost anything in climate, carbon markets are still very little understood. Because I think when you talk about carbon markets, carbon credits, people trading it, we're talking about largely what's called voluntary markets, where people are saying, I'm going to do some sort of project that reduces my emissions, and then I'm going to create an instrument on that, and I'm going to sell that on an exchange. Now, these voluntary carbon markets, where the government doesn't require it, and these markets are highly unregulated globally.
Yeah.
And people talk about it's a big market because it's a $2 billion market. Yes, that's a big number. But what people don't talk about are what's called, compliance markets. Markets where governments say there is a maximum amount that industry can emit. And we are forcing you to stay within that limit. And we will create carbon credits if you come below that limit. People don't talk about it because they're highly regulated. It's like crypto.
Yeah.
Crypto is sexy in markets where there's no regulation. Crypto is boring in markets where it's highly regulated. The thing with carbon credits in regulated markets is that is an $800 billion market, 400 times bigger than the carbon markets that you and I talk about. So carbon markets, it's one of those things where the stuff that is a little bit unknown and a little bit scary and a little bit risky is that sort of fringe market that's unregulated. Mm-hmm. The quality of credits can be anywhere from very good to very bad. But everyone can participate. Versus China, the China carbon market, the European carbon market, extremely huge, but highly regulated, and there's a limit to who can participate.
Right.
So it's one of those things that over time there's going to be more and more knowledge, but I think it's still an area that's little understood.
Okay, thank you so much. To close this session, I would like you guys to give a few points for those who would like to start thinking about building their own sort of climate tech company. What would be the key points for them to start thinking? Technology, impact first? Which one would be the most important things?
I think if we have someone have that kind of idea, want to start their own climate tech, I think they are already good enough for their own because they have a very good mindset already. But actually, I want to mention something to the NIA, which NIA can be very helpful on this one. I think instead of, on top of how to try to introduce new startup to the market, I think NIA could be a really key jigsaw to help those startups to be able to scale up sustainably, in the fashion. Because I think to have to engage with startup, I think it's not easy, but it's not that difficult. But to scale up is another question, another big question. So I think NIA would be a perfect facilitator to help those startups to be able to access, for example, to something like incentive from the government, kind of the solid milestone, if any startup can achieve this kind of milestone. So that means, to keep them alive. And basically the scale up, I think is actually the big problem for the startup rather than to get a new startup to the market.
Right. To start is not difficult. To help them survive is more challenging. Right, Kun Paul?
Yeah, I would say, especially for those that are new to the climate space, I would just, develop a hunger to learn. Again, climate is not a separate industry. Climate touches almost every industry. So the thing is, I spend 24/7 thinking about climate. I read everything I can get my hands on, and I know that the more I know, most of what I know is learning what I don't know yet, because climate is just very big. And I'll say that every new piece of knowledge I get excites me. It's fascinating. I learn something new, and then it shows me 3 new things that I don't yet know.
Right. Learning is always the key.
And to be honest, that's the best part.
Yeah.
Is every one new thing I learn, it shows me 3 new things I have yet to learn. And so, and it's solving problems that touch everyone. You know, so it's one of those things that there is no aspect of climate that doesn't touch people in multiple ways in their personal life, that they could sit there and say, this is an interesting problem. This is something that's going to impact me. It's going to impact my family. It's going to impact my welfare. It's going to impact my long-term wealth. So I think it's just a topic where I just encourage people to, start from one aspect and then just dive deep and deep and deep and just follow where the rabbit hole takes them.
Right, okay, thank you. That's the end of our conversation today. Please join me to give a big hands to our speakers today, Kun Ravi and Kun Paul.
Thank you very much ขอบคุณดรด้วยนะคะ
Thank you very much, and thank you for Doctor for moderating discussions.
Next